We have two hosts here today from the Center Club. I'm pinch hitting for Mary Pat Surkamp, who had an unexpected issue that she had to deal with, along with Al Hutchinson, who you all know, I know, but he's the president and CEO of Visit Baltimore. We're both members of the Center Club board, and we're truly honored to have you all join us today. Thank you so much for your time. We're excited for a lot of reasons. We were the first club in Baltimore to be fully integrated with no prohibitions against anyone based on gender, race, religion, or creed. We started almost 60 years ago. We're 59 years old, so we've been around for a long time and are still very committed to that original mission and vision. Last June, with all the unfortunate activities that were occurring around equity and inclusion and diversity all across the country, we recommitted ourselves to that mission. And we actually made a public statement about that we put in a lot of places, like including the Sun paper, saying that we were recommitted to that original mission of the Center Club. We created 3 committees to look at different aspects of that. Al and Mary Pat chair the committee focused on engaging the Baltimore community around issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and developing a more just community. They are the people that put this program together, and our thanks to them from the Center Club for that, as well as our thanks for you being here with us. We all know that public safety is a major concern. It's on everyone's mind. It affects everything that we do, the communities we live in, our work environment, our healthcare. My background is healthcare. We're really focused on that now. So the timing, I think, is really appropriate to address this as a group and with you all as public servants and us as business leaders, and how we can work together to deal with issues where we can support each other. I know everyone knows the 5 of you, excuse me. Don, you're way up in my corner. So my introductions are going to be pretty short, just because I think everybody knows who you are. So let me start with you, Mr. Mayor. Our Mayor Brandon Scott, is a lifelong Baltimore resident. He's the 52nd Mayor of Baltimore and deeply committed to restoring public trust in government. Starting with his tenure on the Baltimore City Council, he's consistently focused on building stronger and safer communities. State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby is the 25th State's Attorney for Baltimore City and has modeled a progressive, holistic prosecution that is both tough and smart on crime, while also assuring that it is just. He has worked tirelessly to repair the fractured relationship between law enforcement and communities. Commissioner Michael Harrison is the 41st Commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department and previously led the New Orleans Police Department. He is skilled in implementing evidence-based crime-fighting strategies and understands the value of and is committed to community policing as it brings results from partnerships and collaboration. And finally, Don Fry, who is President and CEO of the Greater Baltimore Committee, one of the most influential business and civic organizations in the state. He is unwavering in his commitment and in his actions to promote a competitive business environment and economic growth statewide that embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let me welcome you all here today. And Al, I'll throw it over to you. Oh, I do want to say one thing, excuse me. Make sure if you're a participant and you have a question, you post it in the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that along with Al during the discussion.
Thanks, Bonnie, and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks to this great group for joining us, great colleagues in the fight to make Baltimore a better place, but also good friends as well. And so we thank you, Mayor Scott, State Attorney Mosby, Commissioner Harrison, President Fry, for joining us in this conversation on social justice, criminal justice, and how we can get better. So I also want to really give a shout out and a thanks to Mary Pat Surkamp, who's been my partner with helping to put on this initiative, this very important conversation about public safety. So Mary Pat, thank you for this as well. So I know my good friend Greg Tucker is watching me to make sure I'm on my P's and Q's as I sort of moderate this. So I'm going to do the best I can, Greg, so don't grade me too hard. Give me a curve grade here. But we want to jump right in because I want to be respectful for everyone's time as far as questioning. So One of the things I did in prep work for this just last night, I thought it was very ironic that we're going to have a conversation today about social justice, criminal justice, and equity. And yesterday, Ms. Rosa Parks would be celebrating her 108th birthday. So a freedom fighter for equity. That's what she lived her life to create freedom and equality for Black Americans. And I know, Mr. Mayor, equity is top of mind for you. I've been with you, I've heard you on conversations. And so can you just, as a starting point, can you just discuss with us, just from a public safety perspective, I know that's one of your top priorities in your administration. What are like the 2 or 3 goals that you've set to address public safety here in Baltimore?
Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone, for having me. And Al, you know that 2 or 3 for that topic is going to be very hard for me to narrow it down that way. But I think that what we're talking about here is a complete reimagining of what public safety means in Baltimore. And one of those goals we've already met, and that was to refocus how the mayor's office in the city will look at public safety. That's why I created the mayor's office of neighborhood safety engagement and appointed Director Jackson, someone who has extensive background in public safety, but also using holistic, equitable, and trauma-informed care approaches to healing in Baltimore City. Having that office lead the accountability measures and how we're going to operate, which is the second goal, operate under a comprehensive strategy for public safety or building public safety in Baltimore, as I speak about a lot, is the number 2 goal, which is something that's critically important. It's not just good enough that the police commissioner has a plan for what the police department is going to do to reduce violence in Baltimore. Every city single agency that reports to me and those that quasi report to me play a role in how we're going to reduce violence in Baltimore, bring trauma and healing through implementing the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act. I actually had my first trauma training earlier this morning. All of that comprehensively together is what we're going to do. And the third thing that I would say, something I know that this group will love to hear that we've said, is that we want to restart the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee underneath the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety Engagement, and have asked the governor to allow us to do that by bringing the state agencies back to the table.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too went through that trauma training earlier this week, and that was one of the most eye-opening experiences I've gone through. So thanks for putting that together. Just as a transition to Commissioner Harrison, because I think this is a good sort of alignment to hear from you a little bit, Commissioner, how your plan to address public safety, how is that in alignment with what Mayor Scott is attempting to do with the new administration?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for having us. The answer to that is very simple. It's perfectly aligned. And what you saw us put together early in my administration was to talk about, and you've heard me say this many times, we have to look at comprehensive approaches to dealing with public safety. How do we prevent crime? How do we apprehend people who commit crime and hold them accountable? And how do we do it in a way that's creating better relationships, building trust, building relationships, instead of policing in a way that breaks those relationships, which is then about the community policing model, transitioning this department into a community policing minded and centric police department while working with the mayor's office in this comprehensive strategy. We've said all along, it can never just be police and we can't arrest our way out of it. So it has to be smart, intelligence-led, data-driven, extremely laser focused on what we know to be a small subset of individuals committing the most violence, being focused on those individuals to do 2 things: to stop them from committing violence with enforcement for those who choose that life of violent crime, but also to help them have a pathway away from violent crime. So we can't just be enforcement only. It has to be the police department working with the mayor's office, working with city agencies to provide a pathway away from that violent crime, but also working with how do we fix the conditions? How do we fix the conditions that lead to crime, pushes people toward it or pulls people toward it? Now, many people don't often want to hear conversations about comprehensive solutions, but it's the absolute way we know that other cities have been able to reduce crime, namely murder. And then a lot of times we conflate the two. We talk about crime, but we really mean murder. And we have a culture of violence that we're working to change to a culture of peace. And that's the long answer, but the simple answer is it's totally and perfectly aligned with the mayor's vision for how public safety should be in the city.
I'll circle back on a couple of things you said in a little bit, Commissioner, but I really want to transition over to State Attorney Mosby, because a lot of what you're talking about, Commissioner Harrison, we're talking about changing the culture. Where we are today has not been something that just happened a year ago, 18 months ago. It's been a systemic conversation for years. And so with that, State Attorney Mosby, when you talk about criminal justice reform, and that's a hot topic right now across the country, how does that interest in reform really impact what we're attempting to do here in Baltimore City to deal with public safety?
So Al, thank you, and I appreciate your question. I think just in line with what my colleagues have already talked about, I think the mission of what the mayor has talked about, reimagining public safety, is something that at least my office has attempted to do for the past 6 years. And this is not something that happens overnight. Unfortunately, I've worked with 5 police commissioners, 5 different command staff, 5 different crime plans in the past 5 years. And I can tell you, I'm ecstatic, right, that we have stability within the police department when it comes to public safety. Michael Harrison is a champion for reform and is, I believe, in my opinion, serious about changing the culture of policing in our city. And we've been through a lot. If you think about the past 6 years, from the uprising to, some of the 163-page report that established a pattern and practice of discriminatory policing in the city of Baltimore. And I don't say that to throw, the police department under the bus. I say that because the basis for any sort of public safety plan, and this is what we'll talk about later, is that you have to have, and the community has to understand the stake that they have in this process and in this system. And that trust is critical to this system for it to function and for it to work. And so building that trust, and whether that is through policy, there are a number of policies that, my office has come out with that tries to decrease the engagement of police departments, unnecessary police engagement, for things that have absolutely nothing to do with public safety. I've put out policies that have, been controversial to some past commissioners, in which we want to treat substance use as the public health crisis that it is. We've attempted to go down to Annapolis. It's absolutely not something that you can do by yourself, right? So you changing the laws, it's the policies, it's the collaboration among agencies, right? I've also worked with 4 mayoral administrations in the past 5 years, and I'm excited because, again, we have Mayor Brandon Scott, who is committed to reform and committed to this holistic sort of approach, and who understands that we cannot arrest our way out of the issues that we are presented with in the city of Baltimore. And so building that trust is critical to that. And so we'll continue to try to do that. I'm excited to be on this panel with my colleagues and to talk about how exactly we intend to do that.
Thank you. Great response. I really want to circle back on trust, because that's a conversation that I think this group will want to understand. How do we rebuild trust? Because that's a tough one in any organization to rebuild. So I'll circle back, but I want to get my friend Don Fry into the conversation. And Don, I know you're talking to a number of business leaders on a daily basis. So just what are a few things you're hearing from the business community when it comes to public safety? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in the discussion. Public safety is clearly a #1 priority of the business community. I know the mayor, the police commissioner, and the citizens of Baltimore. So I think we're certainly all in alignment of that being the top priority. I think one of the things that we're hearing is, of course, that we are pleased to see that there is, and Marilyn Mosby just mentioned this, that there is a strategic plan that is data-driven that the commissioner has adopted, and also the mayor is being very forceful with respect to carrying out that goal and others that he has. So I think the fact that we do have one strategy, that we do have one way of moving toward implementation, that's something that's very positive. I think that that's something that, as we heard, we haven't had for the last 5 or 6 years necessarily. So that's a significant change. Obviously, there's a concern by members in the business community dealing with the homicide, violent crime rates that have occurred, but also some of the other offenses that occur in downtown Baltimore where many of the businesses are located. And that's not to take away at all from the tragedy that's occurring in neighborhoods, but I think we have to recognize that the downtown community is also a neighborhood. We've had a lot of people coming in and living in the downtown area in recent years. And it's important that they feel safe and comfortable as well. And that's something that's got to be both in the neighborhoods and the communities as well as downtown. I think businesses just want their employees and their customers to feel safe. They want to feel that it's a top priority for the city and that every day we're making strides to reduce that crime rate and to bring about down violent crime. That often leads the news and drowns out all the positive things. And there's so many positive things that are happening in this area. And I know, Al, from your perspective, that's something from a tourism perspective as well, that's one of the feedbacks that you get from regular surveys as well about tourists that want to feel comfortable. I think there's a feeling that we need to have a strong, visible presence of police downtown. It's a challenging time. I understand the manpower challenges that exist, and I understand the commissioner and mayor's efforts to deploy police officers where they're needed the most, and also the fact that we're dealing with a shortage of police officers. So we certainly want to see those issues addressed. But I just had a situation recently that we probably did not experience years ago. And that is one of my employees was going to go out for lunch. And now when we decided to go out for lunch, discovered that on a citizen's app that she utilizes or comes to her, there's reports of activities that are going on regularly in downtown. So she was going to go to a particular food establishment to grab lunch and realized that there had been an incident that occurred down the street on Pratt Street. So she was reluctant to want to take that step. We need to reassure people in our businesses that it is safe to go out on the street and to meet with people and just take a walk or to enjoy the restaurants that we have when we're fairly open up again. But I think, again, that's a key priority from the business community, from citizens, from our elected officials and police commissioner. So from that perspective, I think it's great to see the alignment that exists.
No, Don, I appreciate that. And no doubt in the travel and tourism space, the number one reason we lose a big convention is due to public safety. And I've talked to Commissioner Harrison about that issue for sure. But Mayor Scott, I want to circle back to you because you've been in your chair now since early December. And you've had a number of different conversations, community conversations, faith-based, business. And I'm just curious, is there a common theme that you're hearing from residents, maybe business leaders, community leaders when it comes to public safety?
Yeah, I think that right now we all know one of the common things and something that's public safety and health related that we're all hearing is about COVID and the impact that has had on everybody. Our residents, our business, everybody in our community are hurting, and that's the most common thing. But when you talk about public safety in the traditional sense, what I hear from folks is a few things. One, hopeful that now we have folks that are aligned, as the state's attorney and the police commissioner talk about, but also hopeful for folks to be able to make that change, that they know that we're going to develop a plan, that they're going to see action, that they know that we're not just going to let these things continue to happen and put our heads in the sand. And when we're dealing with this a health pandemic and a violence epidemic and a overdose epidemic at the same time, it can be a heavy thing for anyone. But for me, it's the hopefulness that I hear from the residents and the business owners about the start of a new team of leadership, all being together in a line, knowing, again, we will never shy away from the truth about Baltimore and the problems and the things that we have to deal with in the city, but knowing that now we actually going to have folks who are working towards actually doing that versus putting it aside and just ignoring it. So that's what I hear the most common right now, Al.
So Mayor Scott, I mean, you have no doubt, in my opinion, the toughest mayor's job in the country. And I applaud you for really stepping up to take on this challenge. But here's the question. What keeps you up at night?
Well, Al, first you're assuming that I sleep. So when I sleep, what keeps me up at night is first and foremost is dealing with that. What keeps me up, I'm thinking about those young women and young men that are losing their lives in the city of Baltimore. For me, that's very personal, right? Because we know that, recently I lost someone that I was close friends with, Dante Barksdale, who saved thousands of lives here in the city of Baltimore. Dealing with this pandemic keeps me up at night, and the impact that it has on our citizens and our businesses and making people who are struggling to provide for their families. That's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, because this is not just about being in there or being in a position of power for me. This is personal, because this city gave me everything. It gave my family everything. And I want that for those people and those families who are still struggling, and they need that now more than ever.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned, Mr. Barksdale's death, and unfortunately over the weekend we had Mr. Duckett, and just yesterday a U.S. Marshal was shot, right? And there are countless other folks that we could go through the list. But Mr. Commissioner, when if we all agree with the premise that public safety does impact business retention, and Don mentioned a little bit about that, from your standpoint and your agency, is any couple steps that you can talk about that we're doing to address some of the concerns that Don mentioned in the business community?
Well, absolutely. He brings up good points that I not only experienced here, but certainly I experienced in New Orleans, which is a tourism city by and large, and the entire city thrives on tourism. And it's about making sure that we have, number one, accountability and systems of accountability to know that our officers are actually where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to do, but great communication strategies and communications with not just with GBC, but with Visit Baltimore, downtown development, so that we have partnerships and we're not working in silos, but that we're working together, sharing information. And, we talked about this. While there's a staffing plan and while there are all types of algorithms to determine how many officers you need here versus there, we understand that we have to be able to support and staff downtown as a neighborhood, but as a tourist area. But we want to prevent crime, not just be there to apprehend people when they commit it. It's about doing both of those. And it's about having high visibility, but it's the balance of doing that while not neglecting anywhere else in the city, and then having the people who have the right temperament to be there and to do the work. And that's why I stay in close contact with all of you to make sure that our communications is correct, that we're telling the story the right way, and that when there are problems, you can give them to me early enough so that they don't turn into bigger issues that are harder to solve. That's some of the early on steps that we're always working on. But then making sure the commander is the right commander, and that the message is getting down to the officers on the street, that they're being productive and not necessarily abusive. Sometimes productive officers, we confuse assertion and productivity with excessive and abuse, which things that we're teaching our officers through this consent decree and our training, that you can be proactive without being abusive. You can be proactive without being overly aggressive. And we have to engage the community. Visibility is a part of it, but it's not just visibility. The question is, what do we want the officers to do while being visible, being engaging? And all of those things, when you put that together and how we are now retraining the officers to do that in a way that we never have trained them before, we think that's what helps people feel comfortable in our city. That's what helps outsiders and tourists feel comfortable coming to our city. And then, you and Don can tell the story the right way.
Got it. So I'm hearing a lot about we need to be proactive with our communication with you and your team to help us. And one of the other key words I heard, Madam State Attorney, was collaboration in your earlier comments. And this team is beginning to partner. But can you talk to us a little bit as business leaders, just the importance of community collaboration to help you and partner with you in addressing some of the changes that need to be made?
So I think you bring up a really great point. When we talk about the business community and the need for collaboration, as I stated before, it's not just the strategic plan, as Commissioner Harrison was talking about having, it's the stability, right? Like we now have that. We have not had that for 5 years. And so what we've seen in this level of stability is that I know that things aren't going to happen overnight, but if you look at the numbers from last year, the violent crime numbers have actually gone down, right? And I'm not attributing that to just exclusively because of the police department, right? Or there has been, I can tell you, from the command staff, on an executive level, I meet with the commissioner regularly. There for a very long time, there were a number of vacancies in the mayor's office of criminal justice, right? MOCJ. We don't have that anymore. And what we've been able to see is incremental progress. But what we can do better, right? And from the business perspective and the business community, is that when we look at some of the systemic issues as to why these crimes are taking place, right? And I talk about this all the time. 28% of Baltimore's population lives in poverty. 35% of children live below poverty. There are 18,000 vacant houses, 16,000 vacant lots. The unemployment rate for young African-American men between the ages of 18 and 24 is more than twice that of whites, right? Like when we look at those systemic issues and when we look at the recidivism rate in our state and particularly in our city, last year it was 40.5% statewide, and in Baltimore City, 47.7% of the individuals were reoffending within a year. So if you want to talk about collaboration, if we provide opportunities and housing, that reduces the recidivism rate. And so what the business community can do, in my humble opinion, is that if we could lean on the business community to provide those opportunities for these folks that are reacclimating and re-entering our communities, to employ young people. I have a partnership. And I have several. I have a crime control and prevention division, one of the only state's attorney's office in the entire state that has one, that's dedicated to breaking the school to prison pipeline. We have a junior state's attorney program where young people, right? We've seen an increase in juvenile violence in the past few years. What are we attempting to do to break that school to prison pipeline? And so what we've attempted to do is to partner with the business community. We take them 6 weeks out of the summer and we show them the positive aspects of the criminal justice system. Mike Hankin from Brown Advisory is a partner with us in that, right? Like we need additional partnerships when it comes to young people so that people are not afraid to go out and into the downtown community when the young people are down at the harbor or being unproductive. We want to keep them productive. We want to ensure that the older folks that are coming and getting out of jails, they have a job, they have housing, they have a reason to not recidivate and do the things that they were doing that got them in trouble in the first place. And so if we can collaborate on those fundamental sort of issues, I think that it would put us in a better sort of position in the end with regard to public safety.
Agreed. And Madam State's Attorney, those data points that you outlined at the beginning, I would love, and I'm sure some of my colleagues would love to get that information. I think arming us with those data points really should enlighten us and help us to be more informed and educated. So if there's any way we can get some of those data points, I can speak for myself personally, those would be extremely helpful.
And I just want to, and because I know that we're talking about public safety and accountability oftentimes, and I know that you guys were going to talk about some of the misconceptions about like our offices and the collaboration. Accountability is being had. I can tell you in 2019, last year, because of COVID-19, right, the courts have been inoperable for some time. But in 2019, my office prosecuted, working with the police department. We would not be able to do this without the police department. There's no chasm there. Yes, I prosecuted 6 police officers in Freddie Gray. Yes, one of the first prosecutors in the country to attempt to hold police accountable, but we work with them every day. In 2019, we prosecuted 4,000 cases, and we came back, of those 4,000, 95% conviction rate. We've convicted every single public enemy #1 that has been designated by the Baltimore police, with the exception of 2. And despite the level of distrust that our community has, not just about police, but prosecutors and judges, and distrustful of the criminal justice system, we are holding individuals to account. But it can't just be a case processing and arresting our way out of this problem. It has to entail the collaboration that you see and that we're speaking about today.
So, Madam State Attorney, thanks for that. And I'm hearing a couple of themes here, reimagining. We need, and the mayor brought that up early, trust, policy changing, cultural shift, providing opportunities to especially young folks, being hopeful and alignment is something that I'm hearing a lot of theme. But Don, I want to come back to you because with those words that have been communicated with this group, the question for you as a business leader, are you optimistic? Or are you hopeful? Or are you concerned about business retention in Baltimore City over the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, Al, unfortunately, because of the obviously the situation we're in right now, I probably would say that I'm all three of those. I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful, but I'm also concerned. I think, again, business relies on predictability and certainty, and there's no bigger time that we've had unpredictability and uncertainty than as a result of this pandemic. At the same time, I'm positive about a number of things, and this not only with respect to retention, but also ultimately business growth in this area. Again, I think Baltimore City is a very resilient city. Its citizens are very resilient. I think we've got strong stability that's occurring in many of our major institutions. Our elected, we have a new brand of leadership that I think is very engaged and very determined to resolve problems that exist. And I think we have to realize that if we all work together, it's not going to be easy, but if we all work together, we can bring Baltimore back to where it was prior to the pandemic. Baltimore has not lost its attributes. It still has the same attributes that it had prior to the pandemic, whether it be the strong business presence, whether it be the strong attraction of urban living for many of millennials and others, whether it be just the attractions, the restaurants, the waterfront area. We still have all those great attributes. We also have, there's probably no city or very few cities in the country that could look and see the prominence and presence of a Johns Hopkins hospital on one side of the city and the University of Maryland, Baltimore on the other side. No city really has that sort of medical research type institutions. So it's a great pleasure to have that. But we also have new modern locations evolving. The mayor, I think a couple of weeks ago, unveiled a RFP that was awarded dealing with a super block that actually will serve as a bridge between the central business district and Mount Vernon and the city's west side. We see activity starting to become at Port Covington. So there's a lot of real positive things that are taking place. At the same time, I don't want to discount the fact that when we do come back to the workplace, whenever that is, and hopefully sooner if people begin to get the vaccinations and remain following what they should be doing from a healthcare perspective, and I commend the city for its efforts in that area, we're going to have some changes. I think businesses are going to look to see how many people are looking to work more from a telework perspective. If so, they may downsize their space, or they may reconfigure, repurpose their space. That's obviously going to bring a challenge. And I think obviously some people were concerned when they saw T. Rowe Price announce it was leaving from the Pratt Street location over to Harbor East. First of all, I'm delighted that T. Rowe Price stayed in Baltimore City, but I'm also one who likes to point out that a city that's strong has a lot of employment hubs throughout. So in Baltimore, we've got Harbor East, you've got the Central Business District. You certainly have over on Locust Point, where people years ago were looking at repurposing older manufacturing type facilities. Now you've got the West Side, and with mayor's efforts with Superblock and other. There's nothing wrong with having multiple employment hubs. People are attracted to different places for different reasons. We just have to make sure that we're promoting them and providing those opportunities. So back to your original question, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think by all working together, addressing public safety, that I think and being continue to collaborate, I think we can see Baltimore to return to the vibrancy that it was pre-COVID-19.
So Don, I know we're coming up tight on time here, but I really want to follow with you, and plus I want to let the mayor back in. But here's my follow-up for you, because you mentioned T. Rowe remaining in the city. But as you know, and all of us know, we often hear some of our business folks talk about relocating to Towson or relocating to Columbia or somewhere in the surrounding greater Baltimore community. So talk to us a little bit about, from a retention standpoint, how important is it that we have a very strong Baltimore City brand messaging to overcome a lot of this negative perception that we hear every day?
I think it's critically important that we have brand messaging. I'm not saying it has to be a fancy slogan or anything of that nature, but we need to have real strong talking points that all of us are joining together on and pushing. And we need, if we're going to have a brand perspective, it's going to be well funded, and it's going to have to be a sustained period of time. You don't have success with a marketing branding effort unless you do those types of things. But again, I think if we focus on the attributes that we have, if we focus on the progress that's being made, if we focus on the advantages that Baltimore City brings that maybe some of our surrounding jurisdictions do not, that's great. At the same time, I think we're fortunate in the fact that we've seen a coalition, so to speak, between Mayor Scott and the local county executives to be talking about the importance of regionalism and how we're not looking to be competitive with each other, but actually looking to work together. And I think that will help the city in the long run.
So, Mr. Mayor, you know, I got an open sales position. I think I should take Don Fry on the road with me to help us sell Baltimore City, right? He's got it down. But
he knows what we need. We got to tell the story. We have to stop letting other people tell Baltimore story, Alice. You and I talk about, yes, we have to acknowledge and own up to the issues that we have, but we also have to, as Don was doing in his remarks, talk about all the great things that's happening in Baltimore and through Baltimore, something that we have done a bad job of letting everyone else tell our story. We have to beat our chests and be proud. And that's one of my jobs as the mayor, as the top cheerleader for Baltimore, to let everyone know. As you know, I will brag on Baltimore the same way I did when we brought the CIAA to Baltimore City, and going to continue to do that because we are a great city and will be even greater if we all continue to work together.
so, Mr. Mayor, and really the three of you guys can chime in on this because the trust question came up earlier. I know Marilyn brought this up, but how do we rebuild trust in this city? What are some thoughts on that? That's a real complex question. It has a number of years. It's probably generational, but how do we start to rebuild trust?
Well, Al, I think the first thing that we can start, and everyone that loves Baltimore, we're talking about trust in Baltimore, right? And it's different from folks who are in different positions. But we know in this city, with the amount of hurt that we have going on, there are a lot of broken relationships and broken trust and bridges that need to be rebuilt or built in the first place. For me, in the position that I'm in, it's one about being open and transparent with the people that I'll serve, allowing them to hold me accountable, meeting them where they are. This is not about looking down on people from a high, but going out, being there, meeting where they are. This is why I do many of the things that I do in a very unconventional way, because we cannot. The status quo has not worked for this city. I'll be turning 37 in a few months. And up until this point, the city has operated the same way every single year that I took breath, and we've been in the same position. But we also, you heard the state's attorney talk about this, we also have to change policy and practice because many of these things that have broken trust with our community members were put into practice by law and policy, right? That's why I passed Baltimore's equity law, because we were the first city to actually make, weaponize red line here in Baltimore first, and to be a city that's going to undo that. And that's not going to happen overnight, to start to work through that through policy. That's why I was proud to hire our first Chief Equity Officer in Dana Moore to make all of our agencies look at their policies and practices, how they negatively impacted people directly, and then start to build that trust at a local level, but also at a personal level. We know, and the police commissioner will talk more about that we have to, through our consent decree and the reform efforts that we have, rebuild trust with our community in Baltimore City Police Department, but also in some cases, build a relationship at all. Because when you grew up, and the commissioner and I've talked about this, if you're a young Black male my age, you didn't grow up with chances are you didn't grow up with a positive relationship with BPD, because you grew up in the years of zero tolerance and walking and breathing while Black. That's how we have to do it from a policy standpoint and from an actual person-to-person standpoint. And the most important thing, Al, you heard me say this before, that all of us at this critical reckoning point for the city that we all can do is be uncomfortable and vulnerable to allow people to tell us where they are so that we can heal as a city together to build those relationships.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We got a number of questions, so I want to sort of shift gears to that if we can. And the first one's for you, Commissioner. Could you let us know if we made progress in micro-policing strategies, including developing strong relationships with neighborhood leaders so that they might have a consistent and trusted BPD team with which to work?
Well, we've made progress. That's a great question, and thank you for that. We've made progress, but there's a lot more work to do. And so when we talk about micro-community policing plans is about getting members of the community and the department together to co-create a strategy that works for that community. Because what citizens might need in West Baltimore may be very different than what's needed in Northeast. And so micro-community policing plans allow community members, and so that's what's coming. We now have our first ever comprehensive community policing plan. We are about to start training all 2,500 sworn members on this community policing plan in the way that teaches them how to engage and how to co-create policy that's unique to that community. When it comes to crime fighting in a micro community policing concept, we've made progress, but there's more work to do. We've adjusted some of the micro zones where we know historically violent crimes have been committed over a long period of time, looking at the most recent crime data. But now we're shifting in, although we had some progress, it's not enough, we need more. We want to make sure that we are being where we need to be, but doing what we should do. I tell recruits all the time, build relationships that were never built and go out and repair relationships that were broken. And I'll sum it up by using 5 words, 3 of which the mayor actually said, and I heard him saying, and we change trust and build trust and repair trust through policy, training, practice, accountability, and transparency. Accountability and transparency go together, because if people don't know what you're doing, you're not doing it. It's not how well we do a thing, but rather how many people know we do it well. So transparency and accountability go together.
Thank you, Commissioner. And State Attorney Mosby, a question came up for you. Can you talk about some of the nonviolent offender programs that your office has created and why those type of programs are important to Baltimore?
So again, I think what we talked about before is that we have to begin to holistically attack this issue, right? And so very early on, I understood that and created a crime control and prevention division in my office. I have a policy and legislative affairs division in my office. We go down and we advocate on laws that are going to impact the citizens of the Baltimore city. You know, I have a community engagement division in my office where we have community liaisons that are not only the face of the office into the community, but the voice of the community back to the state's attorney's office. And, you know, through the crime control and prevention division, and when I talked about not just being case processors, that's the traditional role of a prosecutor, right? Like the only measure of success for typical prosecutors' offices prior to this progressive movement was conviction rates, right? That was the only measure by which you could measure their success. That's not what we're doing. What we've attempted to do in my office is to recognize that if these, for first-time nonviolent felony drug offenders, we have a program that's called Aim to Be More. It's modeled after Kamala Harris's Back on Track program when she was a San Francisco district attorney, and I had the awesome opportunity of sitting down with her for more than 6 hours. It's where first-time nonviolent felony drug offenders, they go through a probationary period where they learn life skills, they learn job training skills, they do community service, and at the end of that probationary period, they're given a job and their felony records are wiped clean. Why am I doing something like that? Because it has everything to do with public safety. Those individuals, if you get a felony conviction, you can no longer apply for a job, you can no longer apply for housing, you can't go back to school because you can't get any financial aid. And so then what other recourse do you have but to go out doing what you were doing in the first place? That in and of itself presents a public safety concern, which is why we're saying, hey, we can't just convict bad guys that are committing these violent offenses. We also have to ensure that we're giving people second opportunities and opportunities that triumph, and collaborating with our business partners. And I would love to talk to Don again about how we can collaborate even more to present even additional opportunities for these folks that make the wrong decision, that are trying to change their lives. You know, we have, you know, our crime control and prevention division. We've touched more than 5,000 young people in the past 5 years just through 3 programs. One in which we go into the schools once a month, the elementary schools, and we again expose 4th and 5th graders to criminal justice careers and bring in judges and defense attorneys and lawyers. You guys can remember when we had officer friendly in our school, there was a rapport that you had with law enforcement. That's what we've attempted to do for the past 5 years. We have a junior state's attorney program that we partner with the police department on every single year, where we've touched more than 250 young people. They go through a 6-week program. They go to the evidence control room, Foxtrot, Federal Circuit District Court. We did it virtually this past year. And these young people are paid to go through this program. The majority of those young people that have gone through this program are now in college in criminal justice careers, right? And so understanding and recognizing that this cannot, building trust is not only going to require, you know, we talked about transparency and building relationships and repairing relationships. That's a given, but it also means that through policy and through practice and through laws and through engagement. You know, one of the things that we have in my office that we've attempted to do, we're going to hold everybody to one standard of justice, regardless of your race, your sex, your religion, or your occupation. That's something that we've set the tone for at the start of my administration. When we talk about transparency, we are the only state attorney's office in the entire state that publishes police declinations. When we decline to charge a police officer for an excessive use of force, or where there's been, you know, a shooting involving a police officer, because we believe that that data is important. We put out data around our conviction rates and, you know, our no process and our dismissals. Again, it's going to take a multifaceted sort of approach. And I think, and as Dawn has so eloquently stated, I am cautiously optimistic that we're on the right track. It's just a matter of, again, now that we have that stability, I'm going to keep saying that we haven't had, I think, you know, we're moving in the right direction, and we have to continue to do so.
So with that, and thank you, Madam State Attorney, I think that was right on the money. And that really leads to another question that was given to the group. And Mr. Mayor, maybe you can address this. And the question is that because of this alignment and that we're seeing now, and strategically these 3 entities are talking to each other, which is great. Is there a plan to have the business community at this table with you all as you all talk and have conversations? Can certain or select group of business leaders also be at the table and help with this planning as well?
No, thank you. The answer to that, Al, is very simply yes. And what will happen, and this is what we're building here as we build out the mayor's office of neighborhood safety engagement, we're going to have those kind of groups and working groups, because you heard from the state's attorney, you heard from the police commissioner, now you're hearing from me about how it's not just about, even from folks in their case that are on the law enforcement side, about locking people up. It's also about helping people that were on the wrong side re-enter back in the community, so that they're not reoffending and they're not ending up with our officers in the commissioner's case, so back before the state's attorney and her assistant state's attorneys. And we are going to need you all to do that, to develop a plan. We all going to work together to figure out how we can tie folks who are re-entering into Baltimore communities. So and I always say this, if you know neighborhoods like Sandtown have some of the highest per capita people in prison, we know that they're going to come home at some point. And we all have to work together proactively and as they're re-entering back home to make sure that we are applying the pressure needed to give them the resources to change their life and have careers to provide for their families. And we cannot do that without you. So please be sure that we will be coming to you around that topic specifically and other ways that you can help.
So Mr. Mayor, with that said, and data comes up a lot. Each one of your agencies' data is extremely important. It's important in my business as well. One of the questions was perhaps some of our citizens may not always understand, get all the metrics that's being used to determine whether we're successful or not successful. Has there been any thought or consideration given to maybe creating some kind of scorecard, if you will, that shows our progress, our success, and how we're improving?
So the answer is yes. Actually, I just announced one the other day, Al, for a scorecard for myself. We have a 100-day tracker that we're doing. We're also talking about, from an equity standpoint, developing a equity tracker and scorecard for our agencies. And it's also about not just putting it there too, Al, for things that people see online. This is Baltimore. We also know that there's a deep digital divide. This is why we will continue to take that message and meet people and citizens and residents where they are, because a lot of the folks who need to hear that, who need to know where we are and where we're going, but where progress has been made, don't have access to the internet or a smartphone. We have to do all of the above to make sure that we're getting those things out. And I've started with myself, and you can see that at mayor.baltimorecity.gov.
Another question that came in, and I know this is really a challenging one, but with the respect to the pandemic and its impact it's had on the complete city, how will the city handle the increase of homelessness and mental illness, like moving forward?
Sorry about that. I was having trouble getting off mute. So I have to give big props to the folks so far. They've done a good job of making sure that we're expanding the help that we have, right? We know, very well, Al, of expanding how we're putting folks in hotels. So now we have Mayor's Office of Home Services operating with 3 hotels. We know that we're looking at a plan to how we're going to have more permanent housing, but we also know, and this work also happens on the side with the police commissioner too, as we're reimagining public safety. We know mental health is an issue in the city, making sure that we are expanding those opportunities and access to the opportunities that are needed here in Baltimore City is something that we're going to be focused on throughout my term, because I know how important that is, dealing with the mental health issues, the substance abuse issues, the other issues in the city are to the overarching goal of public safety in Baltimore, because I think we lose sight of that. We all know, we all hear and consistently know how important it is for us to deal with the homicide and the murder that's happening, but we can no longer ignore the fact that we actually lose more people to overdose, and a lot of that comes from the situations of mental health and other things that folks are dealing with. We will no longer allow our neighbors to die in secret. I know that's why both myself and the state's attorney are advocates for overdose prevention sites, because we can't continue to do the things that we have been doing. They have not worked. We've lost thousands of people in Baltimore to overdose, in addition to the folks that we're losing to gun violence.
Well, I think the real good news is that the folks on this call, we all love Baltimore, just like the work that you all do. So we have to develop some type of partnership together. So Mr. Commissioner, just a question for you. I mean, you're New Orleans guy. I lived down in the Southeast for a while. Are there any cities or communities that, just from a best practices standpoint, that you may look at? Because I know data is really important to you. You and I have talked about this before, but are there any communities that might be somewhat similar to Baltimore that we keep an eye on?
Well, I think New Orleans is really close to it, and you can look at the trajectory New Orleans was on when it, was not a community policing police department, then went into it, and how the murder rate was reduced, and then how that department went into a consent decree, and then there was a comprehensive violence reduction strategy that caused the city to see reductions in murders and shootings over time. Oakland has a good model. You have a number of cities that have used various comprehensive models that some of them call them different things, but as police chiefs, and I belong to a number of agencies, leadership roles in some of them, we all look to each other on what we're doing and what's working. Even the state's attorney and I were at a conference together in 2019 where a number of chiefs were working with prosecutors, trying to figure out how can we find more things alike than we're different, and how to better improve public safety. And so we rely on each other, but you can look at Oakland with its violence reduction strategy. You can look at New Orleans. Baltimore is embarking upon it. Philadelphia is embarking upon it again. It all rises from the Boston model, which I think was one of the first to come up with a comprehensive ceasefire model with using violence interrupters, which was extremely successful. But a number of cities do it. And yes, we share data and we compare notes and we learn from each other.
So all those conferences.
Can I just add one thing, Al? Can I add one thing? The Baltimore City Intelligence Centers, right? This is something that we've been advocating for. We've gone down to Annapolis. as well with the commissioner and the former mayor, but current mayor is still on board, right? These are like strategic decision support centers, which are modeled after what they've done in Chicago, right? It's where they, in one space, pretty much cohabitate with the state's attorney's office, the police department, the health department, my liaisons, and we're able to address the needs of those particular sort of communities, as the commissioner talked about before. I don't remember the name, the micro zone policing, maybe. I don't remember what the policing name of it, but this is what we wanted to do. We actually proposed doing this in every police jurisdiction, all 9 police jurisdictions throughout the city. And unfortunately, because of funding, we've started it and we have it in 2. But the goal is to try to get it in every district yet again.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I say to you, let's continue this kind of conversation for these Baltimore intelligence centers and get the business community at the table to help strategize. We've got a lot of strategic thinkers in the business community, and let them be at the table helping us put this together.
Well, Al, while we have an opportunity, let me just thank Don, because he was very instrumental last year and year before when I first got here in rallying a number of business communities to help the police department with philanthropic support, to help with some of these initiatives, especially this whole group violence reduction strategy in the comprehensive way that we are all going forward. So much of that is already on the table. Of course, the city will always need more, but let me just not have you think it hasn't been done. He's been very instrumental in helping us in that area.
Well, Commissioner, I can't let you off the hook here. You and Madam State Attorney, you need to bring some of those conventions and conferences to Baltimore City. So let's not forget about that. I couldn't go without saying anything. So we're running short on time.
Let me jump in.
Go ahead,
I've got
Bonnie.
about 3 minutes left. I think I speak for the entire Center Club board in saying how wonderful it is to see the 4 of you here together and working together for our city. I'm a native Baltimorean too, so it makes me feel good to see that. We are standing ready to help you however we can. We have committees like Al chairs along with Mary Pat who are working on this. We have a foundation we created mainly to support the city. I know that Don brings all of his support as well. So we want to be sure that you hear from us that we're offering you a hand if there's a way that we can help. As Al said, I don't know whether you're watching the participant list, but we had 100 people on this call, most of whom are business leaders. So you can see how committed we are to support the city. And I would encourage you to keep the conversation going. And now I'll throw it back to you for final comments.
No, Bonnie, I echo everything you said. And I want to thank Mayor Scott and State Attorney Mosby, Commissioner Harrison, and President Fry for what you do to make this city better. Each one of you will have very tough jobs. I'm appreciative, and I know the Center Club team is very appreciative to the great work that you do, but please know that we are a partner here. We want to be helpful. This is a conversation that we can't have in an hour. This is something that we really got to deep dive on and be very strategic. And so I'm very appreciative to your work. And I want to give my thanks to PJ Mitchell, who really asked us to think out of the box and really create some programming that could address social justice, equity issues. That's on all of us. That's not a Black issue. That's an American issue. And so I want you to know that you got some partners here from the Center Club, as well as all the business leaders in Baltimore. We love this great city and we want to partner with you. So again, I just say thank you for taking your time to have this conversation. Thank you for your work. And let's continue to do what we can do to uplift and make this city even that much more special. So Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you got any closing remarks or not.
I just want to simply say thank you all. Thank you for having me. I look forward to working with everyone on the call and continue to work with my partners here to make the city a better place. Thank you.
Well, we're going to give you a minute back of your life. So, but thank you for your time, Don, Commissioner, State Attorney, Mayor. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.